Movement compensations don't exist, it's just normal variability in human movement. That's my impression of a new age movement optimist, strength coach, or physio who is trying to convince you that movement compensations don't exist. Well, here's the truth. Movement compensations absolutely do exist. Now, it's hard to tell the difference, and we're going to talk about that in today's video, but when you do in fact have a movement compensation, not only can addressing it be helpful, but often it is the difference between moving and feeling like shit or moving and feeling your absolute best. So let's talk about it. All right, so first of all, how do we know whether what we're experiencing is movement compensation or just normal variability in human movement? Well, it actually is pretty hard because from the outside looking in, the movement that you're seeing might be the same. And we're going to use an example here of something you're probably familiar with, which is a butt wink in a squat. A butt wink in a squat is when your pelvis and your low back round under you at the bottom. And most typically, we're seeing this as a strategy to create space at the hip joint as we descend. Now, some videos will tell you that a butt wink is bad and it's a movement compensation. And then other people are going to tell you the exact opposite. They're going to say a butt wink is just normal variability in human movement. Well, when we're looking at it, we're seeing the same thing. So how do we know? Well, it turns out that it's not necessarily the movement that determines whether it's a compensation or not, but it's the context around it. For example, let's say someone has been doing a squat and they've had a butt wink their whole life. It has never associated with pain. They've been able to overload that squat over time, and they are making progress with that same exact form. I look at them, I go, yeah, you're butt winking, but that's just how you do it. And maybe it's due to their hip anatomy or their flexibility. Whatever the reason, for them, that's not a compensation. That's just normal variability. But if we take another person who has butt wink, who before an injury used to squat with absolutely zero butt wink, and now, since hurting their hip, they have increased butt wink. And when they don't butt wink, they have pain. Well, now we're talking about something that is a movement compensation. So what a movement compensation really is it's an alternative strategy from whatever the movement standard is and relates to some sort of decrease in function. And that could be due to an underlying disease process, some sort of pain or tolerance issue, some sort of weakness. And if it's just happening in the context of you're getting a little bit fatigued, it's a technical breakdown, that's one thing. But if it's happening in the context of I used to move really, really differently than this, and since I've had an injury or an overload experience, now I move in this way, well, then that's a compensation. And knowing the difference is super important. Now, once you know the difference between is it just normal variability or is it a compensation, then we have to understand what type of compensation it is. Because understanding the type of compensation that it is going to determine how we actually work on it. Now, the good news here is step one in this process is going to relatively be the same whether you're in category 1 or category 2. So category 1 is going to be where you have a coordination issue. So your movement changed after injury or overload for whatever reason, and the injury itself has resolved. So there's no underlying issue with tolerance or capacity, but in this case, you just need to be told to do the exercise different. So it could be as easy as saying, hey, it seems like you're butt winking. You weren't doing that before, so let's do a little bit less of that. They do a little bit less of it. They're able to make gains right away. And this is really the indication that this is primarily a coordination problem. On the flip side, type 2 is a capacity compensation. For whatever reason, they have a reduced ability to do the strategy that you want, regardless of if they understand the cue. They literally can't do it. So let's say they have weakness in their quads and they're doing a squat. On the way up, you want them to go straight up, but they keep straightening their knees back, shifting demands to the back of their hips, and then standing up in their squat. If you were to cue it for the coordination type, they don't have the quad weakness, so they can just come right back up. They can just change how they're doing it, no problem. But for the person who has true weakness in their quads, you can cue them, hey, stay in your legs, but they cannot do it. because they literally have reduced capacity in those muscles. And so we need to either make the activity a little bit easier to come down to the level of capacity, in this case of the quads, or we implement progressive training for those areas to try to get that level of capacity up to meet that of the task demands. It is really that simple. Now, step one in both cases is going to be you attempt your cue. Hey, you're doing it this way. That's not correct. Do it this way instead. If you see immediate improvement in the way that they're doing it, it probably means that it's just a coordination issue at this point. But if you're cueing them to do it till the cows come home, and you're even finding different ways of constraining the movement and nothing is changing, well, chances are there's an underlying capacity issue that you need to assess and then intervene with. Now, if you can do this, in most cases, you're going to be able to take that person from compensation to less compensation or even no compensation. And if that compensation associates with discomfort or reduced performance, you're also going to see improvements in those areas as well. Now, in some cases, there's going to be a decreased ability to modify that capacity issue. A specific example of this could be if someone had a nerve-related injury. So let's say someone injured some of their cervical nerve roots and they're unable to shrug one shoulder girdle relative to the other. What you may end up seeing when they're doing something like an overhead reach is that because they can't elevate the shoulder girdle, they elevate the whole rib cage too to go with it. Now, the cue that you're going to use in this case is to keep those ribs down, keep them from flaring, and lift the arm. But if there's true weakness there, and everything that you've done to try to strengthen up those scapular elevators and upward rotators doesn't work, then you need to accept the fact that some degree of accommodation in the rest of the system might be the best solution alongside of what you're trying to do in terms of isolated strengthening. So in this case, we have a less modifiable injury situation. And so what we need to do is make sure the rest of the system more globally has capacity to be able to tolerate that compensatory strategy without negative secondary consequences. So as an example, if that person has to do this to get that arm up there, you want to make sure that they have resilience in all the muscles of their trunk and in all the muscles of their neck, because they're going to have to do weird twisting in this case through the rib cage to assume that position. It's better for them to be resilient everywhere else so that they can tolerate the way that they have to move given that underlying persistent deficit. All right, so now we're going to just recap and give you a couple of questions to ask to figure out if what you're observing is a movement compensation or not, and then what type of compensation it is and what you should do about it. So number one, is the movement that you're observing different in the context of an episode of injury or overload? So in other words, were you moving really well before something happened, then something happened and now you move worse? If the answer to this is yes, chances are it's a movement compensation. If the answer to this is no, chances are it's not. And if it's not a movement compensation and you're still looking at it and you go, this is wrong just because you heard something about it, chances are you're probably causing yourself increased anxiety that's not going to be helpful for moving and feeling your best. But if it is a compensation, your next best step is going to be to address it. So with that said, you need to now have a movement standard for whatever you're observing and understand how what you're seeing is different than what you want to see. So for example, if you're doing that squat and you're coming down and you're seeing a whole lot of butt wink and it didn't used to happen, you know that to fix it, you have to cue yourself or constrain yourself out of that butt wink. If you understand how to do that, which is something that I teach inside of my Movement Foundations programs, you're going to then see if you can just improve it by coordination. If you can improve it just by working on coordination, then chances are it's a coordination compensation. If you're unable to do that, even after reviewing the cues, chances are there's an underlying capacity issue, and this constitutes a capacity compensation. In this case, you want to look at the involved movement patterns and tissues and devise a plan to progressively challenge that area so that it can work up to the level of the demands of your tasks. At this point, once you're a little bit closer to having the capacity you need, then the coordination cues that you're using will actually begin to stick. And last but not least, If you're working through this process of trying to strengthen that area, and no matter what you do, it seems like you're hitting a ceiling on how much capacity you can restore, then it might be the case that you have an unmodifiable or relatively unmodifiable local capacity issue. If that's the case, you now need to look at allowing that compensation and being able to accommodate for it. In this case, we need to make sure that everything else is stronger so that we can tolerate using that compensation. And we also might need to work with how we're setting up particular movements so that we can accommodate for that decrease in local capacity. Now, if you're struggling with this and you want help, there are a few ways that I can help you get started. Number one is through my Movement Foundations programs. We have an upper body program, a lower body program, and a core program, depending on the area that you feel is compensating. Inside, we teach you all of the foundational movements and skills, how to do them, how to progress them, so that you can build up to proper form. As you go through that process, it will become very evident, given the framework that we've laid out in this video, as to what type of compensation you might be experiencing. Now, option two, and if you want a little bit more hands-on help, is to actually get formally assessed and have me and my team work with you one-on-one on designing your own tailored program to be able to address and accommodate for that asymmetry in training. If that's something that interests you, then go ahead down to the link in the description, fill out an application for movement coaching, and we'll set up a call to see if you're a good fit. All right, as always, thanks a lot for watching this video. If you have specific questions or comments, please leave them down below in the comments section. We've been getting some great ones on these recent videos. And as I've said, I want to make these videos a little bit more conversational, figure out what you want help with, and be able to help provide that value for you. So like, share, all the other algorithm stuff that helps me to help more people. And you know how it goes. Until next time, peace.